Okay, hello. So I haven't been making many videos for a couple of reasons. One, I've had some restless leg syndrome kicking in that's impaired my ability to think very well for lack of sleep. And number two, I thought I would try to be more intentional and planned and articulate and develop these videos a little bit better instead of just shooting them off the cuff. But it turns out if I don't shoot them off the cuff, I don't make them. So I'm just going to shoot them off the cuff, and if it's not good enough for you, I apologize, and I will continue to try to do better. So, wow, I did housekeeping part of my show. It's the first time, I think, maybe. All right, so I think I'm going to tackle Master and his Emissary a little bit more. So I was going to go through each chapter, kind of do a review of that chapter. Not sure I'm going to be able to do that, simply because it's difficult for me to. Instead, I think I'm going to reflect on it and try to give my thoughts on it. So I've read through chapter 2 and I've started chapter 3 a couple of times. I've read through chapter 2 many times. Anyway, chapter 2 was fascinating but difficult because it was a kind of romp through left and right hemisphere usage, or what has been able to be localized to the left hemisphere versus the right hemisphere. And that all relates to how you test for that. He gives three methods. He talks about three methods of testing for that. One, you research people that have left or right brain hemisphere lesions, so damage to left or right hemisphere, and so you can kind of test those individuals and target down where different things are happening. Number two, you can anesthetize the left versus the right and then test accordingly. And three, there are methods of flashing images to the left hemisphere, the left visual field versus the right visual field very quickly, or making noises in the left versus the right. Those are usually used in conjunction with the other two methods. So, he didn't have a lot to say about MMRIs type of things, other than MMRI, other than to say that it doesn't actually show as much as you would think it would, because the whole brain. He repeats over and over again, even though many people I've heard seem to dismiss him for the exact reason he's saying he's not trying to do, for the exact thing he's saying he's not trying to do, which is he is not at any point in the book claiming that the left hemisphere does this all of the job versus the right hemisphere does all of the job. Rather, he says that the two process in conjuncture together, but they split the processing of tasks and do them in different ways. So the how is different. The what is often the same, but the how is different. And of course, he talks about the exceptions, like there does appear to be a section in the left hemisphere that particularly processes language. However, the language he uses in describing that seems to indicate that there are individuals that can be found that process language in the right hemisphere. I don't know that. He just speaks as if he doesn't use absolute language, so it's unclear to me if there are cases or if he's just hedging his bets. I don't know. Anyway, what fascinates me though, like I had to write down everything he said about the left hemisphere versus everything he would say about the right hemisphere, and just make a 2-column list, because I couldn't get the whole picture as I listened. I listened to it like 3 times before I started making my list, and when I made my list, it finally all clicked, which is interesting to me, because I think that means that the linear progression I couldn't get a Gestalt view of, And because the words were linear themselves, I couldn't get a gestalt. So I had to make a gestalt on paper and then look at it and be like, now I get it. So, but the picture that is painted is basically that the left hemisphere is processing through what I would call a singular linear process, which means it looks for single points and strings them together to get to a specific conclusion. That's the process it uses so far. That's in my words. I'm speaking about what I get out of the book. There are statements about how if someone has damage to their right hemisphere, this is interesting. If one has damage to the right hemisphere, ironically, their IQ goes down dramatically, whereas if there's damage to the left hemisphere, it does not. And appears to be the case that the right hemisphere is where the broad capturing of it might be actually, I was going to say that's where the mind captures and puts everything together, but there's reason to believe that when one is using the right hemisphere, one uses the right hemisphere to begin any process, any calculation, any situation, when one absorbs context with the right hemisphere. So it could be that the left hemisphere has tons to do with intelligence, but that the brain can't get the correct context without the right hemisphere working at full capacity, and therefore the answers, though possibly logical, are incorrect because the context is incorrect. That's just I just thought of that. That's speculation, I suppose. Well, a lot of my thoughts are speculation. Gosh, see, I tried this video once before, and I got into a back and forth of trying to describe all the interesting, fascinating things he says in that chapter. I'm going to try not to do that. Instead, I'm going to try to remember some of the insights I had. For instance, an insight? Come on, brain. So, one thing I want to talk about, maybe this isn't quite about his book, but it's about what I've gotten out of the book, which is what I already said. Why am I iterating that? Sorry. Reiterating. And I had to reiterate the correct pronunciation of reiterating. And then I had to talk about that. And then talk about that. Okay, stop. So, I think there is a bias, we could call it, cognitive bias. I think I've made a video about this before, which we could call the singular linear bias. And I think that Iain McGilchrist pretty much describes how it happens, which is that the left hemisphere captures a certainty, makes a simple model of the world, becomes certain of its efficacy, and then utilizes it exclusively. And this creates this dynamic where the brain is looking for conclusions that it's already come through, prejudice, if you will, and is relying only on that and not on being open to new experiences and new perspectives. It becomes so certain that it dismisses alternatives. And what this does is create scenarios where, I'll say this. In the book, he speaks about individuals with right hemisphere lesions who will not accept that they have a left side of their body, or if they do, they see it as something mechanical. Like one individual saw and felt the left side of his body as being made out of pieces of wood and compartments that like food would fall into and strange things like that. And I've also noticed this tendency for individuals to be completely reticent to accept a new perspective. In Thomas Kuhn's the Revolutions of Scientific Knowledge? I forget the name of the title, something like that. He speaks of how the scientists who came before Einstein, who were reviewing Einstein's beliefs, his theories, would not accept them, even though it was being demonstrated to them that the theory was superior. In fact, I'm not sure it seemed to be indicated that many did not accept it, even to the point of, like dying with their old beliefs. Whereas the young crowd who were just coming up were far more interested and willing to take it up so that it can be experimented with and tested. That's, I think, another example of this fallacy. And so I guess what I would suggest, what I've been speculating, is that we can convince the left hemisphere to trust the right hemisphere more if by the use of arguments, and there could be many. The two I use are, I am not God, therefore I could be wrong. I can't confirm everything. I don't have a God's eye view. I don't have all knowledge. But the other one is that it's kind of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It is the idea that if we were to make a complete list of everything, no, it is that we cannot make a complete list of everything. And because we cannot make a complete list of everything, we cannot confirm everything. And because we cannot confirm everything, we cannot be certain that there are not huge gaps in our knowledge that are resulting in incorrect conclusions. So, I am not God, therefore I could be wrong. And this idea that we cannot completely confirm all sets of knowledge, and therefore there could be a gap that we're just not seeing somehow, are intended as tools to free ourselves from trusting too completely, too biasedly, the certainty of the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere is said to have the quality of grasping a gestalt, of seeing the way things interconnect, of seeing patterns, of seeing... My theory is that it uses a methodology of pattern recognition, whereas the left hemisphere uses a methodology of individual points, abstracted over time. The right hemisphere then would see specificity of pattern. This pattern is different from that one, but also see how they relate, so that you can jump analogically and metaphorically from similar patterns. The left hemisphere seems completely incapable of doing that. When it tries to build a model of the world, it does so piecemeal, bit by bit by bit by bit, slowly. And that's the experience I have of trying to build a conceptual model as well. When I try to name things and try to build my understanding from an intuition, I have to build it piece by piece and continue to let these intuitions that I believe come from the right hemisphere, which are telling me it's incomplete, or this doesn't quite work right, or there's more, or that kind of thing. So I think in order to be more productive, we have to be able to fully harness the right hemisphere, and fully harness... okay, so I'll jump over to here as well. I really want to develop a thinking strategy. So there is what I think of as the battle strategy, or you could almost call it the academic strategy, where you you stand strong-armed against an idea until it can answer all your objections. And I suppose it is a way of ensuring that work has been done on an idea such that now you know it's got some credibility and can allow it into your thinking instead of just letting a lot of junk come into your thinking. And that's very valid. But I've seen that process work in this bias I'm speaking of. Whereas I think there are times when if we would jump out of that mindset, that battle mindset, that strong arm mindset, and have what I would call an integration mindset. I had other names for it, but an integration mindset would work. And you just sandbox it. You say, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'm not going to strong arm it. I'm just going to throw it in a sandbox. Okay, what else, what would we need? And then you start looking for completeness. You try to find everything that would also be necessary in that scenario. And then you play with it and you see what works and what doesn't. If the idea doesn't seem to work, then you can strong arm it then. But I think what will happen is that you will find that there is some kind of truth, that is a piece that can fit into a model amongst other things and function. Whereas if you were only looking at that piece as an individual entity and strong arming it, you would never have that piece. That's my hypothesis, if you will. Okay, I think that's good. I had some other thoughts, but I will save them from another time. Thank you.